can start. If any other people walk in, we'll go ahead and join them. Hi folks, my name is Ivo Koya. I'm with Thundermist Lure Company. I'm also the host of the Thundermist Fishing Tips TV show. Maybe you've seen us on YouTube, and if you have, thanks so much for tuning in. At today's seminar, I'd like to talk a little bit about, I'm going to share some tips and techniques with you on fluke fishing. And by the end of the seminar, I hope to be able to share some tips that will put you on the more fluke, so that you have more fun on the water. So we're going to touch on a number of different things, and I will just show you this to open up. This rig right here, I'm going to spend some time showing you this, which is a three-way swivel to a Viper spoon rig. And I'll show you that because this, folks, right here is a fluke magnet. But I'm going to come back to that and show you how that's rigged and show you some of the advantages of using that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about rods. First of all, for rods for fluke, I like to use a 6.5-foot rod or a 7-foot rod. That's a perfect size rod for fluke fishing. And when you're picking out a rod, you usually have a choice of 1-piece or 2-piece rods. A 2-piece rod is great, it's convenient. You want to put it in the trunk of your car or something like that, it's great. But if you can get by with a 1-piece rod, 1-piece rods are a lot stronger and they're a lot more sensitive. So a 1-piece rod will definitely catch you more fish. So the other thing to consider are the eyes. They've got those nice Fuji guides, ceramic eyes, that's perfect. If you've got a rod with metal eyes, just be careful because the line will tend to dig in there. And if it digs in, you've got your line in there, it'll break on you. So a nice ceramic eye is a perfect rod. So once you've got your rod picked out, you want to go to your reel. Now when you're picking out reels, you could use a big reel for fluke because you're not casting all day long. You're basically dropping a line, you're drifting or you're trolling. So the reel size, it's not as important to get a small reel because you're casting all day. You're not going to get fatigued. So you could get by with a bigger reel, and what you want to judge is how much line you want to put on your reel. So if you're going to be fishing deeper water and let a lot of line out, you may want a bigger reel, and again, it's not a problem. But when you're picking out reels, I will tell you this. Take a look at the handle. When you turn the handle on a reel, it should stop on a dime. Okay? So what you don't want is a handle that jiggles. If you've got some play in that handle, what it means is it's an anti-reverse feature. And this feature here on this reel is instant. So that's called instant anti-reverse. And that is critical when you're fishing for two reasons. One, that play in the reel, when you go to set the hook, it keeps shocking the gears on your reel. So what happens is over time, your reel's going to burn out on you. So instant anti-reverse is key because it also, when you have a bite and you go to set the hook, it's instant. There's no lag time between setting the hook with the fish. So two things, it's going to be better for your reel with the instant anti-reverse, and it's also going to allow you to set the hook a lot quicker. You're going to catch more fish. Now people always ask me about reels, ball bearings on a reel. 3 ball bearings is a smooth reel. 5 ball bearings, you're getting super smooth. You know, you get up to 10 or 12, it's hard to tell the difference between a 5 ball bearing reel and a 10 ball bearing reel. So really, you know, it's personal preference after that point. But honestly, a 3 to 5 ball bearing reel is going to do you just fine. And the same thing if you're going to use a bait casting reel. Look for that instant anti-reverse in a bait casting reel because it's the same feature with the bait casting. You want that instant hook set, you don't want any play in that reel, you don't want to shock your gears in the reel. Pay a lot of money for your reels, you want them to last you. So the other thing to consider, if you're going to use a bait casting reel for fluke, and you can use heavy line with that. If you try to run 50-pound test line on a spinning reel, it just comes off like a coily wire. But the bait casting reels, they're actually designed to handle that heavier line. In fact, if you try to run 6, 8, 10-pound test line with a bait casting reel, the way they work, it's a level wind reel, and the line will tend to dig in, and then you'll end up with a big bird's nest. But the thicker line doesn't dig in, it just winds up nicely. So keep that in mind when you're considering what reel you want to use when you're going fluking. So spinning reel or bait casting reel. I want to talk to you a little bit about line. And before I do so, it's important to know when you're going for fluke and flounder where you're fishing because it does make a difference what line you're using for fluke and flounder. In the winter, those fluke take off. They go out to deep waters, out into the ocean, out to the continental shelf. But with this warm weather coming in, what happens is the flukes start to move in, and they move into shallower water. They start to come into the warm bays, into the warmer ocean waters as the currents come in, and typically, between May and September, the fluke are here. And what they do is they'll look for spots, they'll look for structure. Fluke love rocks, for example, but they also like sand and mud. And what you want to key in on, for example, if you have a little underwater structure like that, even if it's flat mud or sand or rock, the fluke will hold in on that structure. If the tide's going out this way, they'll sit here in the front and wait for food to come by over top of that structure. So they'll relate the structure. And what they'll do is they'll sit, if there's sand or mud, they'll get right in there and they'll sit in that sand or that mud, they'll bury themselves right in there. And all they'll have are their two eyes just poking up looking for that bait coming across. So if you have a fish finder on your boat, you're not necessarily finding fish with the fish finder, but you're finding structure. And that's what you want to key in on. If you see some structure like this, you want to key in on this spot right there, because that's going to be your high percentage spot where the fluke are going to sit. In fact, typically right at the very front is where you get a lot of the fish, depending on where the tide's going. And other times they will sit at the top as well, but this is definitely going to be your higher percentage spot for the fluke. Now, the fluke and flounder, you're going to find them in the summer. They'll come in as shallow as 10 to 15 feet. They'll come into those back bays. I remember as a youngster catching crabs, and I'd have a line out, and I'd be catching fluke once in a while, because they come right into those back areas. But they also sit out in 60, 80 feet deep in the rocks, in the structure. So depending on where you're fishing is going to determine what line you're going to use for fluke fishing. So if I'm going to be fishing, if you're going in shallow water, 20 feet deep, okay, you could run straight monofilament line on your reel, no problem. Monofilament line has a lot of stretch in it, so you don't necessarily want to use monofilament if you're fishing deep water. So if you know you're going to be fishing in the shallows, a reel with monofilament line, no problem. Spool it up. All you need is, I like to run 14, 16 pound test. That's plenty for fluke. 20-pound test, plenty for fishing for fluke. And when they're in the shallows like that, like I say, you could use monofilament, no problem, and away you go. But remember this with monofilament line, it's very sensitive to light. It's very sensitive to sunlight, regular light, and it also absorbs water. So when you're fishing with monofilament line, if you go out every weekend, what will happen is that line's going to weaken. So your 20-pound test is going to drop down to 10, maybe down to 5. So it'll become a lot more brittle and it'll snap a lot easier. So what you want to do with monofilament is get into the habit of just strip off a little bit of line. The line that's in the water all the time, take it off, cut it. So you're going to lose a little bit on your spool, but that's okay. And eventually when you get down too low, just re-spool. Monofilament line is real cheap. It's not worth it. You get a nice big fluke on there. You want to make sure he makes his way to the boat. So don't be shy with the monofilament. Now, if you're fishing down in that deep water, the fluke, I know you've got some spots probably where there's deep water and rocks and you love to fish it 60 feet deep, 80 feet deep, then you want to switch gears a little bit. What you want to do is you want to use a braided line. There's a number of reasons why you want to do that. The braided line in that deep water, there's no stretch to that line. So when you drop your line down there for fluke, the minute you get a hit, first of all, you're going to feel it because that braid is very, very sensitive. You'll feel any little touch on your lure, on your bait, you're going to feel it. And the other thing is, when you set the hook with that braided line, it's an instant hook set. If you're fishing 80 feet deep and you're using monofilament line, what will happen is it's going to stretch. You might have a little bit of a bow in the line, the tide's moving you. By the time you pull, you've pulled this far, but your hook's only moved, very, very little. But with the braided line, when you set that hook, it's moving with you. So that's a key. If you're going to fish deep water for fluke and flounder, use the braided line. And then at the end of the braided line, what you're going to want to do, sometimes the fluke get a little iffy. They like to look for bait. What they do all day long, two things. They're hiding from predators and they're looking for food. And sometimes though we get cold fronts moving in and fish shut down a little bit, but they're always looking for food. So if you run a strip of fluorocarbon line to your lure or to your bait, you'll up the chances of catching more fluke and flounder, because fluorocarbon line, unlike monofilament, it does not absorb water, doesn't absorb light, and it's virtually transparent. So the fish basically don't see that line. So if you run a strip, I like to run a strip of at least 3 feet or more of fluorocarbon line off of your braid. Because the braided line, they're going to see that. They will see your braided line. And you know what? You could run braided line to your bait or to your lure, and yes, you'll catch fish. But what you don't know is how many fish you didn't catch. I'll share a quick story with you. A good friend of mine was fishing with his 2 sons. At the end of the day, I said, "How did you do?" My friend said, "I did great. I caught all kinds of fish." My son did okay for the morning, but nothing in the afternoon, and my other son caught 1 fish all day. Fishing the same lures, same water, and I said, "Well, what line did you use?" My friend said, "Well, I had the braided line with the fluorocarbon leader." So I went to his one son who caught fish in the morning. He said, "Well, I was catching fish, but I was getting nicks in my line, so I kept cutting back. So at the end of the day, I was basically fishing with straight braid." He stopped catching fish. The third son didn't have monofilament, didn't have fluorocarbon, just straight braid, caught 1 fish all day. So does it make a difference? You bet it does. And you know what? Fluorocarbon line, it's you can buy straight line or you can buy leader line. The difference is fluorocarbon leader is made to handle rocks. So if you're fishing more rocks and structure for fluke, that takes more of an abuse. So the leader line is typically a little more expensive, but all you need is a 3-4 foot piece. The fluorocarbon line is less expensive. It's still a little more abrasion resistant, but not as good as the fluorocarbon leader. So now you've got your rod, you've got your reel, you're set up with the proper line. I've got to share with you now what I consider to be a fluke magnet, and that's this rig right here. We've been showing this now this is our 3rd year now, and we have more and more people writing to us and talking to us about how many fish they catch using this setup. It's just dynamite when it comes to fluke and flounder. What you have, folks, is you have a 3-way swivel. I'm going to talk to you about this swivel and how important that swivel is. And it goes down about, we like to fish these about 2 feet to a sinker. 2 feet of line like that. Then we run about 2.5 feet of line to a viper spoon, and we rig it with either squid, or in this case, artificial bait. Rig that on there, like so. Rig it nice and vertically like that. You could put a strip of squid on there, or a whole squid, or a piece of cut bait. Some people like to use like belly strips and that sort of thing. Works really, really well. And if you like to use artificial baits, you could put an artificial worm on there, for example. And if it's or an eel, like in this case, if it's just a regular plastic product, spray a little scent on it. If it's one of the scented products, that's even better, because now what's happening is you're creating a bit of a scent trail. So the way this works, sinker's down on the bottom, your viper spoon is flashing and fluttering like so with your trailing bait, and the fluke just come up and they just hammer that. That right there, folks, is the perfect setup for fluke. Now, this swivel. I want to talk to you just a little bit about swivels. That's a new 3-way swivel that's been out for about 8 months now. And the design of this swivel is the fact that it lets you fish tangle free. The center swivel, it's called the T-turn. And the reason it's called the T-turn is because the swivel is shaped like the letter T, capital T. And as you can see, it always comes back to that center position. So what that means is you're constantly fishing tangle free. In fact, I'm going to hold the swivel and force a tangle. Maybe I could ask you to give me a hand here. I'm going to force a tangle, wrap that around 100 times. If you just pull down on the sinker for me, it just unravels and comes tangle free. So what that means to us as anglers, first of all, with a conventional 3-way swivel that tangles up all the time, it makes it very, very frustrating when you're on the water and you're constantly untangling. But what's even worse, I don't know about you, but when I get out on the water, I want to make sure that I have enough time and I want to enjoy my day. So what that means is your bait's running proper, your lure's running proper, you're spending good quality time on the water. There's nothing more frustrating than taking up your bait or your lure and it's all tangled up on you. So the swivel, folks, is a very key part or component. Now the lures, these viper spoons, what I can tell you, and I've had people coming to me at the booth and we have discussions on this all the time. This size here is the perfect size spoon for Fluke and Flounder, right here. It's a size SP4 and it comes with 3/0 hooks. The hook size is perfect. It'll accommodate a whole squid, for example, or a squid bait. It'll accommodate many different types of artificial baits. Now, a lot of people say, you know, you've got these small ones that you can use. These little guys here, you know, isn't that too big for Fluke? Or this is the largest size, because they come in 5 different sizes. Isn't that too big for Fluke? The answer is absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, I would use a lure this big over a lure this big for Fluke and Flounder any day of the week. I'll tell you why. This, right here, this part of the Viper spoon, that's all flash and flutter. That's all that is. This is your bait. So, with the Fluke, they're sitting in there, they're looking for bait. This thing's gonna flash and flutter up a storm from quite a distance. So they'll move to your bait, they'll gravitate to that, they'll go and attack it. But the key is, they've seen it. If you're running a small bait, they might not necessarily see that. You'll have to run that bait, you know, pretty much right over them for them to see it. But with this bigger bait, the bigger profile, and bigger flash, that's what you want to attract a Fluke. You'll catch all kinds of Fluke with a lure that size and a trailing bait. And if you use squid, universal bait, you'll catch a ton of Fluke. And some of the gulp products, the scented products, they'll work remarkably well also. But that's a great setup. These spoons come with single strand titanium wire lines, so the Fluke with their teeth, or if you end up with a bluefish, you're protected against them. So that's a nice combination. And it's the combination of the flash and flutter with the trailing bait that really triggers those fish into hitting. Now, as far as colors, they do come in different colors. That one there is silver blue, silver green, there's gold, there's straight silver, there's a bleeding pearl chartreuse. And I want to talk to you a little bit about colors, because another question I get all the time is, you know, does it really make a difference? Can I snap on a different color, or are they all going to catch me fish? Well, when it comes to colors, yes, they will all catch a fish, but some colors are going to work better than other colors. Fluke, for example, they love white to begin with, and they love flash. If you have a day that the sun is shining bright and the water is nice and clear, you're going to want to use a silver-based lure. If you look at silver in the water, when it's reflecting with the sun, it gives off a ton of flash. And the Fluke are going to see that silver-based lure, and they're going to just kind of come up and hammer that bait. Now, switch gears a little bit. If the day is a little cloudy, or if the water's if it's tea-stained, you know how it gets a little brackish and tea-stained. Well, now a gold-based lure has tremendous reflective qualities, better than a silver-based under those conditions. So when I'm going for Fluke and Flounder, I'm going to make sure I have one of each. And depending on the day, I will put down a different colored lure, and it will make a difference. Okay. We've touched on a few things. I want to go over now on how you fish for Fluke. And what we love to do is very, very effective, is to drift. Again, you have a setup like this. This is bouncing along the bottom. You're drifting along at a nice speed. That's going to start flashing and fluttering and catching you all kinds of fish. When you're drifting, as long as you have a 1 mile an hour drift, this thing's going to go. It's going to take off and it's going to start to flutter. And when you're drifting, you're covering lots of water. You cover a structure like this, what you want to do, if you hook into a fish, you're going to want to start your drift, make your drift. Turn around, move over a little bit, make another drift. So you're covering all kinds of ground for those Fluke, because they don't move in and out with the tide like the stripers do. They will move, but not like other fish. So you have to go to them typically. If you're anchored, you're going to catch Fluke, but not a lot. If you're drifting, you're going to catch a lot more Fluke and Flounder. And when you're drifting and you have a nice spot, just stagger your drifts. That way you're covering that entire area. Just go back and start again and just keep working that area and drift over top. You'll catch plenty of fish. And when you're drifting, I see a lot of boats out there, and I'll share another story with you. Anyone here use drift socks? Just curious. Anyone? Couple? See, not a lot of people use drift socks. It's more of a freshwater technique, but I will tell you this. When you're drifting for Fluke and Flounder, if you've got a fast drift, the wind's moving you and the tide's strong, and you want to slow down just a bit, throw out a drift sock, otherwise known as a sea anchor. All it is a big parachute. It's like a funnel. big parachute with a big hole in the front and a small hole in the bottom. And the water just funnels through there and it just slows your boat right down. So the reason you want to do that is depending on how heavy your sinker is when you're drifting, you want to make sure, the key with Fluke, you've got to be close to the bottom. They'll come up and take a bait, but you got to be close to the bottom, they've got to see it. So, you know, this is just a 3-ounce sinker. That's not bad for a, you know, average size tide, but if you've got a stronger tide, depending on where you're at and what the conditions are and the wind's blowing, you know, you have to go heavier on the sinker. So you may have to go to 5, 6, 8 ounces because you want to make sure that your bait is down on the bottom. If not, and if you're drifting too fast, your sinker's going to be up here. So now the Fluke down here, they might hesitate to go that high to take a bait. So that's another important factor. And if you've got a drift sock, if your sinker, you don't have any heavier sinkers, but you want to slow down, just throw a sock out there. That'll slow you down. You catch a lot more fish. Absolutely. Now, with a setup like this, you may want to troll. You can troll for Fluke. Again, you want to cover lots of ground. And if you're going to troll, keep your speed down 1 to 2 miles. You don't want to go fast. It's not like, you know, going for tuna or something. Keep your speed slow. Let your lure come by. Give the Fluke a chance to see it, and they'll come up and they'll take your bait. And when you want to troll is when you have high tide and there's no wind, the water's stale, it's not moving. That's the time you just want to pump it into gear and just go nice slow troll. But the minute the tide changes and it starts to move again, shut the motor down, start drifting again. You'll save gas on the drift, and the other beauty of drifting is it's nice and quiet. You don't spook anything, especially if you're in, you know, 20 foot range for Fluke. 80 feet, it's not as much of an issue, but otherwise, you know, they do spook a bit. So a couple things to keep in mind there. Now, as far as other rigs you could use, bucktail jigs. One of my favorites. I love using bucktail jigs. And if you use a bucktail jig, you could use a bucktail jig, straight bucktail if you'd like. Work that for Fluke. And what you want to do is you're either going to want to drag that along the bottom or you're going to want to hop it. You could either hop it nice and easy, or if the Fluke are real aggressive, toss your line out, let it get to the bottom, and then rip that jig up. And what it does is the jig will come high real quick, and then it'll fall down again. And when it does that, that's going to trigger the fish into hitting because they see something like it's darting away, and then they want to attack it. And if you use a bucktail jig, tip it with something. It'll work on its own, no question. But if you tip it with either an artificial bait or a real bait or a cut bait, you will definitely increase your chances of catching Fluke without a doubt. And these you can work off the surf too. You don't have to be in a boat. You can work them off the surf and cast them down and work them and they will catch a fish. You want to make sure that the jig is heavy enough that it's going to stay down there. So bucktail jigs, and white is a good color. And if it has a little bit of red in it as well, that's a nice attractor for Fluke. This one here, this is a little small for Fluke, but the multicolored bucktail jig, it's got a little bit of white in there, some pink and red. That's again another attractor. Again, the key is you want to attract the Fluke. They got to see your bait because they're typically hungry. If they see your bait and they think they've got an easy meal, they're going to hit it. When it comes to plastics, this is a small jig head, but you want to get a heavy jig. Again, you want to go maybe 3 ounces with a jig head. These shad type baits, it's a minnow imitating type bait. That's a great bait to use. And what you do is you just slide it up your jig head like so. And again, you just bounce these along the bottom, or you can just drag it along the bottom and let the little thumper tail go. And again, the Fluke will see that and they'll come up and they'll take that bait. So that's another option for you if you like to use, plastic baits. These shads, they like the shads. You could use twister tails as well, but what I found is they tend to go after more bait style. So these type of shads, and this bait here, that's a good size. You could use a smaller size as well, but those fish are hungry and they're looking for bait. So don't be afraid to feed them. They're not intimidated by the size of your bait and lures. They'll take that instantly.
Is that about a 5 inch?
That's about a 5 inch, 4.5, 4 to 5 inch. I got these over at the Worm Bar over here. They have a great selection of plastics for you. This is another setup that you could use. I've got off of the T-turn swivel. Take that line there. that's another typical setup that a lot of people like to run. And you have a bucktail jig down at the bottom, and then the T-turn up top with a teaser, a little teaser rig. And again, you're going to drift with that. It's going to drift along the bottom, and they're going to either key in on that bucktail or they're going to key in on that teaser. So that's another effective rig, and if you use them with these T-turn swivels, it's not going to tangle up on you. Now, the only disadvantage is, again, this is a small bait, so they're going to have to see it. But you will catch fish with this rig. In fact, if you look at those, the Viper spoon rig, you could also share that with you, is you could run a bucktail jig on this, okay, and have that drag down. The problem is, when you're doing that with this rig or that rig, if you're fishing sand or mud, it's not a problem. But the minute you come into some rock, you got the risk of, your bucktail's going to get hung up, you're going to lose your bucktail jig. So it may be more economical to use a sinker. Having said that, the other thing to consider is when you run your line to your sinker, make that line a little lighter than your main line. That way, if you do get hung up, you'll lose your sinker, you won't lose your whole rig. So just a little lighter line to your sinker, and away you go, just in case you do get hung up. The T-turns are a Thundermist lure company product. They're a new product. They've only been out for about 8 months now. They used to sell them here, but they sold out this morning. So, you can get them online.
Though. Online, right? Because
you can get them online.
What's the company?
Thundermist Lure Company. Yes. The other thing, people like to use metal, and Fluke loves spoons, there's no question. That's why the Viper spoons are very effective. Jigging spoons, any kind of jigging spoons. This happens to be a Boa jigger, but any kind of jigging spoons will work you well. And I'm just going to share a few tips with you on jigging spoons that, again, will help you catch more fish when it comes to Fluke and Flounder. This particular spoon is designed to accommodate bait. So you would put like a strip of squid on there, for example, or you could put an artificial bait. Works really, really well. Has a built-in clacker system, and it also has a special bent limerick hook, and it's a special hook that's designed for hook setting. It gives you a bit of an advantage. And the second hook also acts as a built-in stinger hook. But when it comes to vertically jigging, what you're going to want to do is get your jig right down to the bottom and then lift it up about a foot. Take up the slack, lift it up about a foot. Jig it up, and then let it flutter down. The key on the flutter down, let it flutter down on a completely slack line. Because if you have a little bit of tension on your line, your jigging spoon's going to fall, but you're taking away some of the action. So let it fall on a completely slack line. If you get a hit while it's falling, you'll see your line jump or you'll feel it. But the key is you want to maximize the action of your jigging spoon. So by letting it flutter down on its own, you're going to maximize the action of the spoon. It's going to have a nice erratic fall to it, and that's perfect when it comes for Fluke and Flounder because it's going to look like an injured bait fish to them. And the other thing is, after you've jigged, and the jig is settled, and you've seen it settle, don't jig it right away. Give it a second or two. I like to wait at least 2 seconds, sometimes 3. What happens is, and a lot of people get into this habit, you jig it, goes down, jig it again, goes down. Maybe a little too aggressive that day. If you take more of a finesse approach, you're guaranteed to catch more fish because sometimes those reluctant fish, they'll see your jig falling and then they'll see it snap again. They might get startled. But on the other hand, if you let your jig flutter down and then you give it a pause, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, a lot of time on that pause, they'll just take that bait. Especially with something like this with bait on the end of it, they'll just take it right away and then jig it up again. So that technique, that jigging spoon technique, that jig and pause, that's really key when it comes to fluke or any bottom fish. If you like to use jigging spoons. And I like to say another point just on fishing rods. I know I talked about rods a bit, but you see the bend of that rod? That rod there is considered a fast tip. You get a fast tip rod, medium tip rod, or slow tip rod. When you're fishing for fluke, you want a fast tip rod. What that means is, you see the bend? It's bending from basically here down. So what that means is, it's a very, very sensitive tip, and it's going to give you a good hook set because you've got a lot of power here, and it's going to be a solid hook set. A medium rod will bend from here, and a slow action rod actually bends right from here. You get a complete bend on it. And you want a slow action rod if you're working a crankbait, you're cranking for stripers or something like that, but not when you're jigging or when you're fishing for fluke. You definitely want a rod that produces a fast action. That's all you want, is that little tip to go. Much more sensitive and great for hook setting. Okay, the other area I want to talk about is just very quickly, my last little demo here is people fishing from surf. I like to surf cast, and you can do that. Again, you set up with that T-turn swivel to a sinker, and if you like just to use bait, just go ahead with a simple, nice sized hook, put your bait on there, and what you want to do when you're surf casting, of course, cast it out as far as you can, let it get to the bottom, and then what you're going to want to do is work it back to you. Don't just stand and let it wait. Let it go down in the tide and then bounce it along and work it back to you. It's almost a technique like fishing for steelhead, for freshwater trout. Because what you're doing there is you're constantly moving that along, and again, you're covering more ground. So you're going to want to fan cast the area, get your bait out there, let it bounce along the bottom, and work that area right back towards you. And don't be afraid to move and try different spots on the surf. Don't stay in the same spot all day. You know, change your spots, because again, typically you'll move more than those fluke will. So cover as much ground as you can. In a boat, it's easy. Drifting along or you're trolling, covering lots of ground. When you're on the surf, it's a little tougher. So this will work very, very well for you. And if you keep it moving, you keep it away from the crabs and other fish as well. So, I hope I've shared a number of tips with you and techniques. I hope you've enjoyed today's seminar. I wanted to leave you with as much information as I could, cover it right from rods and reels right to fishing and depths and structure. And it's all about, you know, having a good time on the water, enjoying your day out there with friends and family. This is my first time doing the show here in Somerset, Jersey. You've got a great show here. It's fantastic fishing here in New Jersey and Delaware Bay or off of Sandy Hook or wherever you fish. You've got some great fishing opportunities. Saltwater fishing is absolutely fantastic. A lot better than freshwater. The fish are bigger, they're stronger, and they're tastier. One last thing I'll share with you. A quick recipe. One of my favorites. I've got it online if you forget it, but it's real simple. And if next time you get a fluke, you got to try this recipe because it's absolutely delicious and it's so easy to do and so fast. You're going to think, how can that be so good? But basically, you're going to get a Ziploc bag, put your breadcrumbs in there, add some spices, whatever you like. I like to add like the Old Bay seasoning, maybe some paprika and some lemon pepper. Just mix some spices in your breadcrumbs. Drop your fluke in there, shake it up. Now, all you do, take a broiler pan, put some slivers of butter on your broiler pan, put the fluke on top, put some slivers of butter on top of the fluke, sprinkle a little paprika, put it in the broiler, depending on your oven, 10 minutes on high. I'll tell you right now, there's nothing better than that right there. You'll really enjoy that. So I'd like to end by saying thank you very much for joining me today. Thanks for tuning into our show on our website. We appreciate that very much. And I'm happy to, if you want to stick around and answer any questions that you might have, or of course back at the booth, I'm happy to talk to you. Always love to talk fishing, fluke, or otherwise.
Where's your booth?
Thanks very much. Website? The booth is right at the very end. If you walk straight to the very end, down by the boats, in the corner there. And the website is thundermistlures.com. And we also have a fishing tips website where we share, if you enjoyed today's seminar, we have a demo, for example, on fishing line, how to spool up your reel, for example. I could share that tip with you too, because that's very important. When you put your spinning reel on, look at your line. Have someone, when you buy your fishing line, it comes in a spool like this. And the spool's round, of course, it's just a little demo, right? But rather than holding your fishing line like that and having it come off the spool round like that, turn the spool that way and have the line unwrap. What you do is, with your spinning reel, most spinning reels, what they'll do is they'll spin down, because what this will do is, if you spool it up incorrectly, you get a lot of line twist in your reel. These spools, they typically go this way. They start, if I'm looking at you here, it starts in this position and it goes down to my left. So when I'm looking at the spool of line, I want it facing me like this. and I want the spool pointing down to my right. So the line is going to be hanging there, so it's going to come off of the spool like that, and it's going to come onto my spool like this. No line twist. Very, very important. So if you have someone in the house to give you a hand just to hold the spool like that, but we have demos like that on our Thundermist fishing tips website. We give different information on different fishing and different methods, and there's videos on there, there's articles on there. It's an interactive site. You may enjoy going on there. We'd love to have you on there and spend some time on our site. That would be great. We've got lots of videos out there, and they're very informative, and freshwater and saltwater.
Thundermist, M-I-S-T?
Thundermist, yes. Thunder and then M-I-S-T, mist. Thundermistlures.com and thundermistfishingtips.com. If you come by our booth, we've got, happy to give you a brochure with all our information. But we get a lot of visitors visiting us online from Jersey and New York, and we spend a lot of time on the northeast coast. There's great fishing here, right from Massachusetts right down to Chesapeake Bay. You guys are fortunate to be on the coast. It's a 7-hour drive for myself, but we make it every year. We love it down here. We're from Niagara Falls, Canada. So it's a 7-hour drive, and I love every minute of it. It's not tiring at all, because I know it's waiting for me at the other end. I have relatives in Jersey and Connecticut, so we're always coming down to that salmon up there. It's good salmon fishing up in Lake Ontario, great salmon fishing. Lake Erie is phenomenal for smallmouth bass, but I'll tell you, saltwater fishing, can't beat it.
How about Niagara River?
Niagara River is phenomenal. If you want to go up there, like right now, we're going to be out there probably doing some filming in April. Lake trout, salmon, rainbows, brown trout, phenomenal. Starting now, right into all of April and into May. It's just, it's a great fishery. If you get down there, fish the lower Niagara River, right at the mouth of the lower Niagara River on the Lewiston, New York side, right there at the mouth. Phenomenal fishing for trout and salmon. And if you're after lake trout, we did a show last year for lake trout. I don't know how many lakes we caught. We must have caught 50 of them that day. They just stacked up there. There's like the Niagara Bar. Again, it's structured. They're stacked up on the structure, and you just move over top of that structure and catch all kinds of fish. But I'll tell you though, fresh water is good, but salt water is great. Salt water is great.
Do you use the Viper lure in like the back bay and the rivers too?
Absolutely. The beauty of the Viper spoon, it comes in 5 sizes, so what we do is we just tailor the size of the lure and the bait to what we're fishing for. So for example, up in Canada, fishing freshwater for walleye, for example, we run the size 1 and 2. With a night crawler or a small leech or a minnow type bait. That works great for walleye. In fact, the Viper spoons were featured on the cover of the In-Fisherman Walleye Insider. So, but now if I'm going for Fluke, I'm going to go to the size 3, 4, or 5. And in fact, for Fluke, they were featured in the Fisherman magazine, which is here today. Last year, they did a nice feature article because they were running the larger size spoons with squid and catching beautiful doormats. So you just tailor the size of the Viper spoon and the bait to what you're fishing for, freshwater or saltwater.
You mentioned about the leader. When I'm fishing like 80, 90 foot of water, like say, 20 miles off down in Cape May,
Yes.
I'm usually tying my, the line right to like the spro.
Yes?
Do you still suggest I put a 2 or 3 foot leader?
Absolutely.
Does it matter if I tie it right to it or use a small swivel to connect it to? What do you suggest?
A little less hardware. Tie it
Right.
direct. Try it direct to your lure.
Okay.
And what you do is use a uni knot to tie your 2
Right,
lines
okay,
together.
right.
It's a simple knot, and the line will break before that knot gives. And that's a good knot to tie a braid and monofilament or fluorocarbon to. But definitely
That will make a difference, you're saying?
It will make a difference, without a doubt.
Okay.
Without a doubt. You will up your catch ratio without a
Even in
doubt.
80, 90 foot of water?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because remember, 80, 90 feet may be dark for us, not for them. They're used to that. They have a keen eye.
I wonder how does this reflect on that?
Again, they reflect, I like for the deeper, I would go with a bigger Viper spoon. The bigger, again, you're going to have more flash, there's more vibration, because vibration's a big part too in the deep water, and a big bait. And a gold-based one might show a little better in the deeper water than the silver, because the silver needs a little more light flash off that silver side. But yeah, the gold base are great.
Are the T-turn swivels also made for larger species also?
Yes, they, as a matter of fact, you probably, if you take a look, I talked to one of the editors of the Fisherman magazine a little earlier. He ran the T-turns for stripers, absolutely loved them. The large size is rated at 85-pound capacity, and there'll be a feature coming out, he told me, in the next coming weeks on the T-turn for stripers. So they come in 3 sizes. You can get the small, medium, or large. Unfortunately, we sold out here at the show, but you can get them online. And the largest one we have now is 85-pound. We've had a number of people come to us at the show who even want higher capacity, so we're going to be looking into maybe like 150-pound, 200-pound for big deep sea fishing as well. So they've been received very, very well. A lot of compliments on that product, and the people who have been using it have been writing us, telling us how much they enjoy it, and you'll really like using that. It'll work great for you. And one more.
And that works well with the, I know you had the little teaser
Yes.
versus just tying, you know, the monofilament line, you know, right to the, you know, the line, but that will keep it from getting.
That's right. And what you want to do, when you tie your T-turn swivel, and you do your knot on there, don't leave like a big tag end of line on the end of the swivel. Trim it up, make a nice neat cut, trim up that little excess line so you have a nice neat knot on there. And when you do that, it's going to unravel every single time. It just does, because it has nothing to catch on, so it's just going to continuously wants to stay in that center position. You know, it's always going to want to go there. And when you're fishing deep water, the fellow mentioned fishing down really deep. When you're dropping your line down, your line and your bait or your lures, you know, it's going around and the tide and the current. That's, you know, this is going to be ideal for that situation.
Is that a small or medium?
This one here is the large size. That's the 85-pound capacity. I don't have any medium-sized ones with me. Oh, yes, I do. This one here is medium. The one that I had rigged on the teaser rig, that's a medium size right there. And then the small size is even smaller. We like to run, like the large size and the medium size is really ideal for the saltwater. The small one, it's 35-pound rating. We like to run those in the freshwater when we're running for walleye. It's got a nice profile, small profile. It's, you know, not that visible to the fish. The 35-pound one's great for freshwater, but we like the larger ones for saltwater.
The medium?
The medium is 55 pounds, and that one there, really, the medium size is going to do you. You know, it's funny, people come to me and say, well, I like the large ones because it's got big, you know, for my vision. Yeah, that's great too, you know. But the small, the medium ones are perfect for any application you have here. The large ones, yeah, they'll take bigger, thicker line because it's got a bigger hole. And if you know, if you want to see it a little easier, that'll help there too.
Are they available in any of this store around here?
It's funny, we've had, I think, half a dozen retailers approach us at the show here, so they're going to want to get them. But right now, the best place to get them is right online from us at thundermistlures.com.
Just out of curiosity, how much do they cost?
They're $2.99 a pack, and there's 3 in a pack. And they're a beautiful swivel, as you can see, very strong, and they're black nickel, it's saltwater rated. They're a beautiful swivel. They're very inexpensive, and the shipping costs are really cheap. I think it's $3 or something to ship. But it's a great product. You'll absolutely love using it. You know what? When you use those, come off the day on the water, they're just a pleasure to use. I had did a little testimonial. We did one of our shows in Niagara River Convention there. We're fishing for trout offshore this time of year for rainbows and browns. And there was a guy fishing beside me, and this when we just first came out with these swivels. And he's watching me fish, and I'm watching him fish. And he's watching me, and I'm casting Niagara River. It's got a lot of current. So I'm casting it down and just bouncing that along the bottom like that, finish my drift, and then I bring it back in. And every time I bring it in, it's not tangled out, I just cast it out again, and I go again. The poor guy beside me, I'm watching him, he's doing the same thing, but every time he reels it in, he's untangling, and then he throws it back out again. Finally, he came to me and he says, "What are you doing?" So I showed him the swivel. He got all excited, "Where can I get them?" And I said, "Well, all I have are 3 swivels. These are pre-production, you know." Of course, I gave him, I said, "Here, take one." And so he tied it on right away. I saw him go over there right away, and now he's doing the same thing that I'm doing and loving it. So it's just a pleasure to use. It's a great swivel.
And how much are the Vipers?
The Vipers start at $6.99 and then they work their way up. So depends on the size of the Viper spoon. And with the Viper spoon, I didn't touch on, but all the hooks are Mustad Ultra Point hooks, and they're snelled with single strand titanium wire line. And the beauty of the titanium wire line is it's kink-proof and it's tooth-proof. So if you happen to catch a blue, because you will catch blues on this, you're protected with that wire. So it's a great combination. So it just depends on the size that you want. Well, we did it just in time. You've been a great audience. I've enjoyed your company. Thanks for joining me today, and as always, good luck on the water and good fishing.